In 1995, the world stood on the edge of a possibility that now feels almost mythical. Japan had the future already arrived, and Tokyo shimmered like a hologram of tomorrow, neon and steel woven into a skyline that radiated certainty. Corporations grew so rapidly, they seemed almost alive. Bankers, engineers, and factory workers all believed they were carrying the country toward an inevitable destiny, global economic. And then, the miracle stopped. Not with colliding armies, but with a whisper. Japan, once hailed as the next economic superpower, is now being overtaken by countries it once towered over. Wages have flatlined for a generation. Cities shrink quietly. An aging population casts a long demographic shadow. But Japan's story is merely not a fall from greatness. It is a warning about what happens when a society, no matter how brilliant, becomes too comfortable to change. When the engine of progress no longer accelerates, but idles. When success becomes a burden too heavy to lift again. Because every nation dreams of reaching the top. Very few ask what happens after you get there. The miracle forged from fire. When World War II ended in 1945, Japan was not simply defeated, it was unrecognizable. Entire cities flattened, industries obliterated, millions displaced. Its economy was not broken, it was absent. And yet, from that devastation emerged one of the most extraordinary recoveries in human history, a reconstruction so rapid that economists still refer to it almost reverently as the Japanese miracle. Within just a handful of years, the American occupation introduced reforms that rewired the economic system, while Japanese workers, driven by a mix of humility, national pride, and relentless discipline, rebuilt factories from the ground up. In these early years, Japan didn't merely restore what was lost, it reinvented its identity. By the 1950s, Japan had already transformed itself into Asia's emerging manufacturing hub. Its strategy was simple but ingenious. Export-led growth. Produce high-quality goods for the world, restrict imports, reinvest profits into technology and education, and repeat the cycle. It was industrialization with precision engineering. Perseverance turned into policy. Competence became culture. In just 40 years, Japan's GDP exploded by more than 6,000%. A nation that produced $47 billion in goods in 1960 was generating more than $3 trillion by 1990. Factories once known for cheap toys now crafted precision electronics. Sony and Panasonic became icons on every continent. The 1964 Shinkansen, the bullet train, didn't just represent engineering power, it symbolized Japan's new identity: fast, efficient, futuristic. By the 1980s, Japanese innovation seeped into daily life everywhere. The Sony Walkman changed how the world listened to music. Canon and Toshiba redefined the tech frontier. Management philosophies like Kaizen reshaped factories from Detroit to Dusseldorf. The results were staggering. By 1989, 15 of the world's 20 largest corporations were Japanese. Made in Japan meant excellence. Tokyo's skyline glowed like a monument to ambition, and many believed the United States would soon be playing catch-up. But hidden beneath the neon confidence was a quiet belief that Japan's ascent was unstoppable, that success was now a permanent state of being. And that belief, that certainty, would become the quiet seed of collapse. The pattern begins when triumph awakens fear. By the early 1980s, Japan was not just a rising economic force, it was the economic force. Its cars dominated American highways, its electronics filled American living rooms, its trade surplus with the US ballooned year after year. For Washington, this was no longer an economic inconvenience, it was a political crisis. American factories shuttered, unemployment rose, and public frustration pointed at Japan as the culprit. Politicians condemned the widening trade deficit. It didn't matter that global economics are complex. Economically, emotionally, symbolically, America felt like it was losing. By 1985, pressure reached a boiling point. The United States proposed something radical, an intervention in the global currency system itself. On September 22, 1985, inside New York City's Plaza Hotel, the finance ministers of the world's 5 largest economies, Japan, the US, West Germany, France, and the UK, met to sign an agreement that would deliberately weaken the dollar and strengthen the yen. This moment would be known as the Plaza Accord. For the US, it was a way out. For Japan, it was a ticking bomb. The yen's appreciation was brutal. Within less than 2 years, it surged by more than 50%. Imagine waking up to find your currency worth twice as much. Your exports, cars, electronics, machinery, instantly become twice as expensive to the world. Japan's export engine, the machine that had powered the miracle for 4 decades, sputtered. Export growth dropped from plus 15% in 1984 to minus 5% by 1986. Factories that once symbolized unstoppable momentum struggled to stay open. Tokyo's policymakers were terrified. A strong yen was not simply a challenge, it was an existential threat. Something, anything, had to be done. A dangerous new fuel. The Bank of Japan responded with an aggressive counterattack. Slash interest rates, make borrowing cheap, drown the economy in liquidity. From over 5% in 1985, interest rates plunged to 2.5% by 1987. At first, the strategy worked. Money flowed, businesses borrowed, consumers spent, and optimism surged. But cheap credit carries a hidden poison: speculation. Easy loans inflated real estate. Banks poured money into stock markets. Corporations leveraged themselves to chase growth that wasn't real. Ordinary citizens poured savings into assets they believed could only rise. The Plaza Accord had succeeded in weakening the dollar, but it had set off something far more uncontrollable in Japan. A bubble swelling beneath the surface, vast, shimmering, and dangerously hollow. To solve America's trade anxiety, Japan had ignited the fuse of its own future crisis. The weapon was not war, it was the yen, and the detonation was only a matter of time. By the late 1980s, Japan was no longer simply rich, it was euphoric. Real estate prices rose so quickly that they defied gravity, logic, and history. A single square meter of land in Tokyo's Ginza district, just 1 square meter, could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Some joked that if Japan ever ran out of land, it could simply buy California. Others weren't even joking. At the peak of the mania, the total value of Tokyo's real estate exceeded that of the entire United States. One city worth more than an entire nation of 250 million people. It sounds fictional, but in 1989, it was simply the air Japan breathed. Land was no longer dirt, it became a status symbol, a declaration of power, a passport into a new aristocracy of wealth. Corporations hoarded property as though it were gold. Families bought plots not to live on, but to belong to the dream. And the absurdity didn't stop there. Even golf club memberships became luxury assets. Not cars, not homes, golf memberships. At elite courses, a single membership could sell for over $1 million. People traded them like stocks, riding the wave of collective delusion. Owning a spot on a golf course was proof you had ascended into Japan's gilded class. In the stock market, the story was the same, only louder. The Nikkei 225, Japan's premier stock index, tripled in 4 years. By the end of 1989, it crossed 38,000 points, a record so unreachable that more than 3 decades later, Japan still hasn't broken it. Investors believed the market could only move upward. Banks lent money as if risk had vanished from the universe. Companies bought other companies, then bought land, then bought more land. It was growth without gravity. To the world, Japan was a miracle intensified, a nation that had somehow conquered the economic laws that constrained everyone else. But beneath the glitter was something fragile. A system that felt permanent, unstoppable, divine. And like every illusion built on borrowed confidence, it had to end. The crash, when future went quiet. When Japan's bubble burst in 1990, it wasn't a thunderous collapse. It was a slow, devastating exhale, the long hiss of a dream deflating. Property values didn't simply fall, they crumbled. The stock market didn't simply correct, it imploded. The wealth Japan had believed in all evaporated almost overnight. But the true loss wasn't measured in dollars or yen. It was measured in belief. A nation that had risen from atomic ruin to global dominance suddenly found itself drifting, uncertain, insecure, paralyzed. People expected a temporary downturn, but months turned into years, years into decades. And Japan entered what economists would eventually call the lost decades, a period of stagnation unlike anything the modern world had seen. From the early 1990s to the 2010s, Japan's GDP barely budged. Growth averaged less than 1% a year. This was not a recession. This was a freeze. Prices fell consistently, deflation, a condition far more dangerous than it sounds. Consumers delayed purchases. Companies delayed investment. Wages froze, then stayed frozen. Debt became heavier not because it grew, but because everything else shrank. Factories that once hummed with life grew silent. Real estate values never returned to their former heights. Corporations that had been titans, Sony, Panasonic, Sharp, became cautious, hesitant, slower than global competitors. Many lost their innovative edge. Japan, the country that once symbolized the future, suddenly felt stuck in perpetual yesterday. The zombie era, an economy that refused to die or live. Banks were drowning in bad loans, trillions of yen lent during the bubble years that would never be repaid. But instead of allowing banks to fail and reset the system, the government intervened. It propped them up, softened their fall, kept them alive on paper. Economists began calling them zombie banks, institutions that walked, talked, and operated, but were spiritually and financially dead. The same logic infected corporations. Unprofitable companies were kept alive simply to avoid the social stigma of bankruptcy and mass layoffs. Instead of creative destruction, the painful but necessary force that renews capitalism, Japan chose gentle preservation. The result? An economy that looked alive but whose pulse was faint. The global experiment. Japan before the world copied Japan. For decades, economists argued about what went wrong. Keynesians blamed weak demand. Monetarists said Japan never printed enough money. Japan tried both approaches. The Bank of Japan cut interest rates to near zero and left it there. When that failed, Japan pioneered a radical invention, quantitative easing, the massive purchase of government bonds using freshly created money to inject liquidity into the system. It was an experiment so groundbreaking that Europe and the United States would later adopt it during the 2008 financial crisis. But here is the haunting part. Even that wasn't enough for Japan. Inflation remained near zero. Wages stagnated. Growth barely sputtered. The miracle was gone. And what remained was a remarkably stable, eerily quiet society. Clean streets, punctual trains, low crime, polite citizens,
but one whose economic heartbeat had slowed almost to stillness. Japan became the first modern country to grow old and stop growing. And the tragedy is not only in what Japan became. The tragedy is in what Japan foresaw before anyone else. Because the very forces that froze Japan, aging populations, falling birth rates, rising debt, fading optimism, are now sweeping across the world. Japan wasn't a warning ignored. It was a warning too early to understand. The next reveal, a demographic winter. By now, the outlines of Japan's stagnation are visible. But the next truth is darker. Japan is not just aging, it is running out of people. The median age is 48, one of the highest on Earth. The fertility rate is 1.4, far below the replacement level of 2.1. In some regions, it drops below 1.0. Japan once had 127 million citizens. Today, that number falls every year. By 2050, it may shrink to under 80 million. Entire villages vanish. Schools close with no children left to teach. Towns become silent, beautiful, orderly, but empty. Every person who disappears takes with them a worker, a taxpayer, a creator, a dreamer. And for a modern economy, losing people is far worse than losing money. Japan's demographic winter is not a metaphor, it is a countdown. And what comes next is even harder to confront.
Japan's population crisis is not just a statistical curve bending downward. It is a transformation unfolding in real time, visible in every quiet village, every closing school, every empty home reclaimed by nature. Japan is not metaphorically shrinking, it is physically disappearing. The working-age population, those between 15 and 64, is collapsing faster than any major economy in the modern era. In 1990, 5 workers supported each retiree. By 2050, that number will fall to 2. Imagine the weight of an entire economy resting on fewer and fewer shoulders, each year heavier, each decade more impossible. And unlike countries in Europe or North America, Japan has rejected mass immigration. Less than 3% of its residents are foreign-born, a striking figure for a nation facing demographic freefall. This resistance is not rooted in hostility, but in cultural memory. Japan's national identity is tied deeply to continuity, shared language, shared history, shared rituals of respect and belonging. Japan's homogeneity has been a source of unity for centuries, and now it becomes the single barrier preventing demographic renewal. Without immigration, without rising birth rates, without enough young people to replace the aging, Japan's future narrows. Villages empty out, rural towns vanish. Many regions display haunting signs, houses marked as abandoned, post offices shuttered, stores covered in dust. In some towns, elders ask one final question: who will look after our graves? It is a line both poetic and devastating, a reminder that economic decline is not just about GDP, it is about the fading of human presence. Japan's crisis is not loud. It is quiet, patient, irreversible. The culture that built Japan and now holds it still. For decades, Japan's greatest strength has been its discipline. Meticulous work, precision manufacturing, deep respect for order. This discipline once transformed Japan from rubble into the world's second-largest economy. But the same cultural traits that built the miracle now anchor it in place. Japan's fear of failure is legendary. From childhood, mistakes carry shame. Risks invite judgment. Entrepreneurship, celebrated in Silicon Valley as a badge of courage, is seen in Japan as reckless self-exposure.
The result is a nation where starting a business is less appealing than joining a large corporation and never leaving. Japan doesn't reward risk-takers, it rewards the people who avoid mistakes. This mindset is reinforced by the tradition of lifetime employment, the guarantee that once you join a company, you stay until retirement. Stability becomes sacred, mobility becomes rare. Innovation suffocates. Japan's employment rate of 87% looks like a miracle on paper, but beneath it lies a hidden truth. Many jobs exist simply to maintain harmony, not to create value. Productivity per worker has plateaued. Too many people doing busy work instead of meaningful work. A system where employees stay late not because they create, but because leaving early would disturb the unspoken social rhythm. And for those dreaming of entrepreneurship, Japan's bureaucracy is a labyrinth. Paperwork, stamps, approvals, procedures. A system designed for a world where stability mattered more than adaptation. The World Bank ranks Japan 29th in ease of doing business, behind Singapore, South Korea, the US, and even emerging economies. And with only about 8% English fluency nationwide, Japan's integration with global markets remains limited. These cultural and bureaucratic structures, once the backbone of Japan's rise, now form a quiet cage. Not oppressive, not malicious, just immobilizing. The hidden crisis, a mountain of debt. Behind the politeness of government announcements and the precision of economic charts lies Japan's most alarming challenge: a national debt exceeding 240% of GDP, the highest in the world. This number is not abstract. It is a weight pressing on every future generation, every future budget, every attempt at recovery. How did it happen? For decades, whenever the economy stalled, the government performed the same ritual: borrow more, spend more, smooth the pain. Stimulus packages built roads, bridges, and seawalls. Bailouts saved companies that should have failed. Subsidies kept industries breathing even when innovation had stopped. And then came the strangest twist. Nearly half of Japan's debt is owned not by foreign governments or investors, but by Japan itself. The Bank of Japan has spent years buying government bonds, effectively printing money to fund the state. It is a financial loop where the borrower and the lender are the same entity, an illusion of stability created by accounting. For over 20 years, Japan kept interest rates near zero to make this burden tolerable. It even experimented with negative interest rates, paying people to borrow and punishing them for saving. But now inflation is returning, slowly, quietly, uncomfortably. And with it, interest rates must rise. For a country holding the world's largest public debt, rising interest rates are not an inconvenience, they are a crisis multiplier. Each 1% increase adds tens of billions in new interest payments, money that must come from higher taxes, spending cuts, or more borrowing. Japan's economy is not healing. It is being artificially kept asleep, numbed by zero rates, cushioned by central bank intervention, shielded from painful reforms that might actually force renewal. Japan is not fixing its problems. It is buying time. But time, like population, is something Japan is running out of. Final reflection. The quiet fall and the quiet lesson. So where does Japan's story go from here? Can a nation that once built the future rediscover it? Japan stands at a crossroads where the past shines brighter than the path ahead. Its miracle became its myth. Its discipline became its anchor. Its caution became its cage. And yet, Japan remains beautiful, orderly, peaceful, a nation of quiet defiance. Robots now harvest rice in fields once tended by families. Smart toilets analyze health data in homes where children no longer live. Abandoned schools become community centers for aging residents.
This is not the rebirth of growth. It is the art of endurance, a slow, deliberate acceptance of a new kind of future. Japan's struggle is no longer Japan's story. It is a mirror held up to the world. Across Europe, birth rates collapse. Across America, debt climbs. Across Asia, population growth slows. Young people everywhere question the promise of upward mobility. The world is quietly retracing Japan's steps. The real question is not whether Japan will rise again. The question is whether the rest of us can avoid its fate. Yet in the end, Japan teaches something profound. There is dignity in stability, grace in endurance, wisdom in accepting limits. Every empire falls, but few fall so quietly. And maybe that silence, calm, reflective, unwavering, is the most Japanese thing of all.